Hello. Like, yeah, we'll be starting soon. We're just waiting for a few more people to join. Hello everyone. Welcome to Razorpay's engineering meetup. Today we have a very interesting topic. I think a lot of you asked for this in our last meetup, which is the panel discussion on design systems. So we'll be discussing a lot of things about design system, everything you want to know about. And during the session, if you have any questions, you can just ask them in the chat, or and we'll take them by the end of the session. So we can get started now. So hi, my name is Saurabh. I work at Razorpay as a senior front-end engineer, and we have Kamlesh, Chaitanya, and Saurabh today. So first, I'll just bring up Kamlesh. You all know Kamlesh already. So he's a principal front-end engineer at Razorpay, and he gives a lot of talks. You might have seen him around, and he works on design system and a lot of other things in front end. So, hello, hi Kamlesh.
Hey Saurabh.
Then we have Saurabh, who works as a lead product designer in Razorpay. He leads the design system from the design aspects. So, yeah, hey Saurabh.
Hey, hi, Saurabh.
Hello. And then we have Chaitanya, who also works on design system. He's a lead front engineer at Razorpay. You also might have seen him around in top conferences and talks. Hello, hey Chaitanya.
Hey folks, hey Saurabh.
Yeah, so we can get started now. So I'll just start with basic question. I know you all might have been tired of answering this, but just to get things running and just to get this conversation running, um, let's start with what is design system and how do you define it. I know there is a lot of definitions for design systems, so I'd just like to hear from you all on what you think is a design system. I'll start with you, Saurabh.
Sure. You're right. Like there are several definitions on the internet about design systems, and everyone have their own articulation about it. But I would like to define design systems as a single source of truth, basically, which holds your design principles, values, and which help your teams to design and develop products in a harmony. And if it is designed really well, it can also serve as a purpose of an educational tool for your team, right? So that they can also help in solving complex UX problems. And one another thing which design system also focuses on about the design consistency. So when I say consistency, it means making your elements uniform in the system, right? And it is not only about the look about it, right? It is about how they feel, how they behave. And to give you some examples, there is one famous example about Google, right? They have this material system with them, right? Similarly, Apple has their HIG. So everyone has their own system, and people are generally relating in that manner. And generally, it is very different from library. I think Kamlesh can throw more light upon how it is very different from a design system or a library.
I think that's a common question that most of us usually have. I think like component library is like a subset of design system. Like usually when like the way I see design system, it's like it defines your language, it defines your principles, like what is your brand tone, what are some common principles that you want to use. A best example that that I keep going back always is like, for example, if you look at all the Apple products, right? Let's take an example of MacBook, take an example of iPhone, take an example of iWatch. If you keep all of them together, right, they all have like the same border radius. That's exactly where I always say that, okay, this is what a system means. Like you basically define your principle and it reflects in all of your products. So that defines your brand, that defines that kind of creates a brand identity. And when it comes to component library, it's basically a subset. When you want to, let's say, implement those things on web or mobile or any other platform. So it's like an implementation detail of your design languages, how I kind of differentiate design system versus components.
Right.
Yeah, Chaitanya, do you have anything to add, please?
Yeah, I think they did sum it up really well. It's more than just a component library. You have to think in terms of systems when you look at design system.
Um, Next question I have is around, so we started building this design system. Just want to understand what problems did we face before the design system that made us move to design system? So we can discuss about the problems. I think
Yeah,
we can start with Chaitanya.
I think like Saurav and Kamlesh both mentioned, right? Consistency is something that you have to drive via your design system. And before we had this design system in place, we did face consistency issues at Razorpay itself. And that has 100 variants across our products. You don't want your users to feel like they're disconnected from the brand identity itself. We have different products like Razorpay X and payment gateways and multiple mobile apps, but we didn't have a single brand identity associated with all of them. So if you look at Razorpay X, that has a dark theme, whereas Payments Gateway that has a light theme. But even with the difference of themes, you want a brand identity to remain the same at the core of it. So I think that was one of the major reasons that pushed us to look into design systems for Razorpay.
Yeah, Kamlesh, do you have anything to add to this?
You're on mute, Kamlesh.
So yeah, another thing that I want to add to that is like the redundancy that used to come. Like for example, usually we end up in conversations like, okay, can you make this button 2 pixel border radius? Okay, it is. Like, can you move it 1 pixel like left, for 4 pixel below, and all those conversations, right? So when you kind of like when you don't have a system, you kind of end up doing the same repetitive conversations over and over again, which kind of leads to, like, designers and developers kind of getting frustrated because they always have to discuss about the same things. And it's believe me, it's like a boring thing to always say, okay, can you just move it 1 pixel left? Can you have like a border radius which is like more roundy or whatnot? So and another thing is, uh, when designers design on the tool, right, it's like what we see is like a mock-up, but translating them to code is a different game altogether. Now, if you don't have something in between to bridge that gap, you kind of again have a lot of chaos, right? So like similarly, we had the same thing. For example, we were using we use Figma. So if let's say there's no system, I'm talking about a no system world. So what generally developers would do is that they'll click on a mockup, let's say a card or let's say a button. They'll see see the inspect pane and then just see, okay, what is the CSS for this button, and then they just copy paste into their code. Now that is not a scalable approach, right? Because what if the designer changes that particular visual aspects of a element? Now that who is responsible to get it reflected to the code? And you can't, like, your design doesn't coincide with your code. Like they both are not versioned together. So these are like common problems where you see that people spend the same amount of effort, but again, it is not leading to any meaningful outcome. Um, so this was also like a biggest problem for us, and we were also scaling back then. Not having a system meant that chaos is gonna exponentially grow.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think adding to what Kamlesh has already said, right? Generally in design and dev and handoffs, we got a lot of problems when we don't have a system, because generally how people used to work or designers used to work is like they will create screens, they will use hard-coded values, and generally it will be given to the developers. And I'm just talking about one aspect here, because there are several things here. They might be doing a different kind of a flow, which is not familiar, right? And developers generally just inspect and code it. So the expected outcome is very different from what is delivered from the design, right? So I think that always stays the same. And I think design system is really kind of solving that, because everyone speaks the same language there.
Yeah, those are great points. Even when I was working on Razorpay.com, I have experienced this where usually the thing that you get in Figma, it's and when you're trying to translate it into code, it's a different, like on Figma you get pixels, this many pixels from this end, but on code you have blocks and props and variants. I think that's a good point that design system kind of solved that for us, where we just have similar things on both dev and design. Um, just a follow-up question to that. So, okay, we face this problems, then we move to design system. I think I'd love to know about if you could talk us through the initial days of design system. How did we start? How did we form the team? Um, I think we can start with you, Kamlesh.
Yeah. So like the first and the foremost thing that when we wanted to bring design system to Razorpay, at that time, like again, when you go and talk about design systems to let's say the leadership in the company, right? The first question that you get asked is, what is the impact of this and what is the effort that is going to require, right? And the the thing is that design system is like a long term and a huge investment. Now, for it to, like, for people to get convinced that it is like what they are signing up for is really worth it, because it will solve all our user experience problem, our dev problem, our design problems. Now, what we started with that, what we started off back then was, we kind of created a pilot project. Now, what do I mean by pilot project is that we picked, like, we were kind of building our first mobile app. What we did was we kind of attached it with our design system. We said that whatever components we are building for this mobile app, we'll rather build it in our design system as well. So if there's any upcoming mobile app, they can also reuse it. And similarly, since we wanted to build for web as well, which is like a cross-platform architecture, we kind of we spent some time on it back then. But again, our main focus was to build an MVP version of it to really show what power or what value design system brings us on the table. So the initial days were basically, there was no dedicated team. It was the mobile team which was building the product as well as building the design system side by side. But yeah, once we shipped that mobile app, it kind of blew everyone's mind, because now they didn't have a mobile app, but they also had another product, which is our design system. That's how we got like a buy-in, and then we kind of halted there. We didn't continue in that mode. We kind of halted there, figured out or charted out the entire vision or the whole big roadmap for design system, and then we asked that, this can't be worked upon in a what do you say, a parallel fashion as building the product. It needs a dedicated team, and then we kind of listed down all the challenges we had faced and what were the shortcomings of our MVP back then. So and one thing which we when I kind of retrospect and I really like about is that we didn't solve for everything at that point of time, because our main focus was to show the value of design system. So it was basically we just focused on how people would realize its value, and we had a hope that okay, we will get a dedicated team and we'll literally iron out each and every problem. And I think here we are today. Like, we have a dedicated team. We are like a bunch of crazy folks, all of them like working on a lot of individual pieces. Like, you name it, we have it. So it's like we solve for motion, accessibility, like TypeScript. You solve for CI, CD, every like all the problems that you kind of relate to. We kind of have a team as of today, which where we kind of focus on each of these problems in a very focused fashion. So I think, yeah, that's kind of like a journey in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think even though you mentioned that we did have some shortcomings in the MVP and we didn't have a dedicated team, we did choose a route where we picked a product. We're going to build for this product, and then we'll see how it scales. And now we look back, we do realize that it wasn't a scalable design system. There were so many shortcomings, but even with all of those shortcomings and it not being scalable, we managed to ship two whole mobile products with that. So right now in production, both of the mobile apps are built with the old design system that we built in the MVP phase. And not just that, we even got contributions from some web developers within our org, and they extended that for web as well. And we have a bunch of modules that are shipped for web as well using that same cannot scale design system. So I think what was important back then was picking a mission that we want to build this, picking a product that we want to build it for this, and then hoping it will scale. And even though it didn't scale as much as we wanted it to, but I think the result was good enough to convince our leadership and the org that, hey, listen, this can create a huge impact. We need to invest more time and efforts into this. And I think that's a good starting point to build a design system.
Yep, and adding to this, what Kamlesh mentioned, right? We are right now a centralized team, but it's not from day one, right? We started maybe basically we have tried each and every model. Like, we started off with a solitary model, wherein only a single person is taking care of all the things. But we got a few challenges there, basically becoming a bottleneck about things. There is no decision making process at that time. So again, we moved to kind of a federated model at that time. And when say federated model, basically it sounds great because from each BU kind of we have people who are contributing to the system. But again, surprisingly, we got challenges there as well. Basically, what we get on a daily basis is there is no set process and there is no genericness in that thought, because each person who's coming from that particular BU is solving for their own use case and their specific problems. But for a system, we need to think universally. That's what we are making, right? And that's where basically today we reach at a centralized model where we have a dedicated team. So we research a lot, we audit, we audit things internally, externally, and whatnot. So basically each piece, like all the small pieces which Kamlesh talked about, we research a lot, and generally we give out a solution after testing each and everything. So I think this is something just to call out around how the models right now, like what are the team structure we have. So right now we are working on a centralized model.
Nice. And yeah, I think the point that you have mentioned that we built the MVP, and I think that is something that has been even a great learning experience, I guess, because the APIs that we like, let's say that it was unscalable, but I think those unscalable decisions, because of that, the decision that we make now in our design system, we have a nice reference where we can just go and refer to that and make better decisions. So I really like that. The overall learning is helping us a lot in building like a new API for new design system. I think one more question that I get a lot, I think a lot of people ask me every time I meet someone is how does a cross-platform work? How do we make cross-platform, and what do we mean cross-platform first of all? So I think you can start and just Kamlesh, you can start and explain just what we mean by cross-platform and what are the platforms that we're supporting right now, and how do we build it?
Yeah, I guess this is again the most commonly asked question. I'll just put a shameless plug over here and just giving a talk at React India about this whole thing. So I'll not share a lot of spoiler things over here because it's like a discussion in its own. But I'll just try to explain it in a nutshell, like how this works. So when we say cross-platform, for us, we started off with to support for React Native, and Svelte. Svelte right now is not very much into our scope. We kind of have parked it for now. Right now, we are focusing on React and React Native. So we had a bunch of options at that point of time. Like we had one option was to have a different team for both the platforms like React and React Native. And then we had another approach where we just use React Native Web. And then the third approach, which is what we are doing. So the thing is, both the approaches that I spoke earlier, like for example, like different teams having or building components for their own purpose, that for our case, it wasn't a viable option because we were anyways using the base was React. So if we had like native Android or native iOS, we might have explored that option. So having two different teams just meant that we'll just go against our philosophy of having similar APIs that would work across platforms. So from day one, our agenda had been that if you have a code snippet or you have a layout or a component, you can literally copy paste it on, let's say, web or native, and it should just work. That was basically our end goal. The way we made it work was with the help of bundlers, with the help of bunch of file extension things, and a lot of TS things as well. So it was mixture of each and everything. What we did was we kind of looked at how React Native actually works. So React Native, let's say if you have a way where you need to write a code that would just run on iOS or just Android. So the way React Native works is it will just try to resolve file extension, your files by the extensions. We kind of like that idea very much. We kind of steal that idea and put it in web. So now our components, the way we kind of write our components is like, if you have anything which is different on, let's say, web and native, you just put it into different file extension. Otherwise, we just have one file and it will just work. At the core, we are using style components because it has support for web as well as native. So at a very holistic view, we kind of take, like we haven't built anything as a framework, but it's just utilizing the native capabilities of the tools that we have, the whole tool chain that we have at hand, plus bunch of abstractions that lie in between. So that's basically how our cross-platform setup works in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think Kamlesh did cover most of it. He also did mention something about React Native Web and how we did explore React Native Web. We do get this question from time to time about why we don't use React Native Web in Blade at all. And I think it's more of it's a lot more of a sensitive topic because everyone has very strong opinions on whether they should use React Native Web if they want to build something cross-platform or not. And we've seen a lot of very successful design systems out there with React Native Web. And I think there is no right or wrong answer here. It depends on what your org needs, what your team is comfortable with. And after that, you can take a decision here. So what we realized early on was that at Razorpay, we had a lot of web engineers. We had more web engineers than native engineers, which meant that if we did use React Native Web, we'll have to follow React Native APIs. And in general, there will be an additional learning curve for our web developers. And we wanted to avoid that. So nothing against React Native Web, but we found this solution of bundlers and picking up platform specific files easily and still being able to do a lot of code sharing, very neat and very convenient, and that fit all of our use cases. For example, if React Native doesn't support Gap in their Flex system, but web supports it, right? And if we have to add it for our web components, we should still have the ability to do that. We should still allow our developers to add that. So those were the kind of things that pushed us towards not picking React Native Web at the moment. We could be wrong, but we are hoping we are right, and this works out for us and scales up.
Yeah, and I think my favorite part about cross-platform setup, like Kamlesh mentioned, we can copy code from web and paste it in Node.js and it just works. I think that also simplifies the documentation a lot, because every time I go to the Blade documentation, I don't have a separate section on React Native and web. It's just one section, one code snippet that just works for everything. So yeah, I really like that setup. So one more aspect of cross-platform is like earlier we talked about how the design and developer they talk different languages. We don't have like the Figma the thing that we get from Figma is different from the code that we write. I know that we are solving that issue in from design the issue between communication between design and developers. I think. So yeah, I just have a question to Saurabh on how does this implementation, how is this implementation on design, and what do we do to solve this?
Sure. So, like we are using Figma, right? And as already mentioned, we all speak the same language. So again, the same thing goes here. So we are basically here to solve the design and dev handoff. So we tried the same way as they were doing on the native and web thing, right? So the ideal expectation we have is like if developer copies something from the Figma, it is very similar to what they do in code, right? So just to give you an example, what how our Figma is structured is it in a way it's a component like structure, right? So let's say you're working for a button component, and it has some props saying label name or value or whatever it would be. So I think that way a developer can directly copy that and they can just paste it into their code and it can directly result to some results thanks to Figma because there are few capabilities that they have given us regarding this. But yeah, we are trying to make it very similar to that. Even our tokens are named in such way where if you just copy and paste those values, it will directly resolve to what is basically what we are trying to convey them, right? So I think we have structured in kind of a way where if developers are also looking at our Figma files, they can understand what it is written, and because we are all speaking the same language, it helps in that way. So yeah, this is how we have structured.
Yeah, I think that's great because it simplifies the process a lot. Even like even when I go to Figma file, even I sort of understand what component it is and how I can change the variants, etc. So even without knowing nothing about Figma, so I think that's a great thing. So I know that we are very much into the design system now, and we have built a lot of components as well. So I just want to understand what are the challenges that we faced while building the design system, or just the challenges that we face in general throughout this process.
Before that, just can we like I think can we just show people like how our things work in Figma? We can just show like what do we exactly need.
Yeah,
Maybe that would be
yeah,
able to relate better. Maybe
yeah,
just
Yeah,
you can pull in just one component and we can just show up how our properties
yeah, sure.
actually.
Let me load. Yeah, one of the
Yeah,
component. Just let me load the file.
yeah.
Maybe you can continue. I can share it once that
Yeah.
is loaded.
Yeah, I think should we continue talking about certain challenges?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll show you it towards the end. I'll
Yeah.
just open something on the keyboard.
Okay. Sure. So I think one of the biggest challenges we faced is just educating everyone. You don't just stop with educating yourself about what design system is. So we still, as engineers or designers, can learn a lot about what design system is, try to implement that on Figma or on code. But that's not enough, right? You have to educate the correct stakeholders. You have to educate your managers. You have to educate your leaders. And only then, once they're aligned on what a design system is and why our organization needs a design system, is when you'll get enough bandwidth and enough freedom to actually build it out. So one of the challenges we faced early on was educating all our stakeholders. We've had to organize a lot of internal discussions, presentations. It was a great learning experience for us because that gave us more clarity about do we really need a design system. And I think that will be a starting point for a lot of folks if they are also trying to sell a design system within their org and trying to convince their leaders.
Yeah, Kamlesh, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think education, like apart from also education, like another aspect is how you also start speaking their language, because when you are building or working on design system, communication is the key factor. Like we have heard, like we have learned it the hard way, but because when you're talking to different people, everyone has a different understanding. Now, as a developer or a designer that you're working on the design system team, you need to you need to convert your communication vocabulary to the person that you're talking to. So it's like you sometimes you have to go very technical, sometimes you have to be at a very surface level. So it's like you need to fine tune your same conversation in a different fashion. Only then people would understand what exactly you are trying to do. That is one thing. Another thing is measuring the impact. So I think oftentimes, like in this entire software industry, I guess the way we always, like all of us like numbers, right? Like everything has to be tracked down to numbers. Okay, our graph went up, down, up, down. So that is where everyone gets excited. But I think, and the thing with design systems, it's associated with user experience. It enhances your user experience, your brand identity, and a lot of these things are not measurable. Like you could very well measure how many teams adopted your component or how many number of components you are shipping. That's kind of one impact, but how is it like how is it changing the lives of the end user? It's not like you can't directly associate with it. Like yes, you could always do user interviews, take feedbacks. So I think measuring impact was a challenge, and I remember attending one of Nathan Curtis webinar where he had like very nicely mentioned that when you're working on design systems team, there are two ways to measure the impact. One is a qualitative measure and another is quantitative. So call it like quantitative, like all of us know that okay, if it can be tracked down to numbers, we are all good. Uh, but qualitative is what is rarely spoken about. Like for example, while you're working on the design system team, you interact with people. You kind of do office hours where you kind of like the way we do at Razorpay is like we have office hours, which is like 30-minute slot. We have scheduled it, and anyone can book that slot, and then we all will be in that discussion, and we'll brainstorm or if we would solve some issues. Or another things are like we also try to conduct FGD. So we kind of go and take some feedbacks from developers on how is it really helping them or is it worsening their lives. So and then we also do conduct workshops as well to train people, to educate people, designers, developers. So all these things are also impactful things. So the way you measure is like you kind of take some qualitative things that okay, the number of sessions that you're doing are actually putting efforts, right? So that also should be measured. How many sessions you are taking, how many workshops you're conducting, how is it helping the team to get onboarded faster. So I think it has to be fine balance between qualitative as well as quantitative measures. That was a challenge, and we kind of learned it the hard way, and we are still not pixel perfect at it. Because let's say there's a goal that you have to take that okay, this page, like we would let's say take a goal that all the new projects would be built 100% on Blade, right? How do you track that? You can like it's possible, but it's not straightforward, right? Either you have to write a bunch of scripts. Some scripts might be at runtime, some scripts might be at build time. So like it's like overall you have to basically figure out what matters to you as an org and as a team, and based on that you would kind of define your measurable impacts.
Yeah, I think we also had to sort of understand what OKR models are, because most companies follow these OKR models. and converting our qualitative metrics into quantitative metrics and pushing them out as OKRs was a big learning curve for us. But I think because leadership most of the times understand the OKR language, you have to adopt to it. So you have to sort of pick up OKRs in the form of shipping 17 components in 1 quarter, building 8 components on design in 1 quarter. So things like that, right? But you have to learn to convert what your goals are into quantitative OKRs. You can do a lot of quantitative things, but converting them into quantitative OKRs is what will sort of push your leaders to also let you develop all of these things.
Yeah, so I think I just have a follow-up question. I think one more aspect of it is adoption. Like how do we push people for adopting the design system internally? Like Kamlesh mentioned, one is the sessions, but yeah, in general, what are we do for adoption? I think we can start with you, Saurabh.
Yeah, so I think the way adoption should happen generally, ideally, should be from the design side or from the product side, right? Because then only it will get implemented really well. And as Kamlesh talked about, there are still various challenges, especially on the tracking side. Even on the basically on tech side, you can still write scripts there to analyze the data and things, but on the design side, you can't do that. So generally, to get your team in sync with everything and got them in line with the things, you have to basically push it using your design team only, because that's where it starts and that's where it got implemented. Because it's not only about the implementation on one side of it, like it's solved for everyone. It's not only solving for developers, or it's not only solving for designers. So I think the best way to do is to push it from design, and then it can be taken up by the development team.
Yeah, I think they're also similar to something we did with our old Blade, right? You need to pick your
Yeah.
first-class citizens. You need to pick a team that is going to help you drive this. So you pick somebody who you know you have good relations with, you who you know understand design system really well, who can push the same to their
Yeah.
leaders, and then you drive it through them. They are designers, they are developers, and they become your MVP. They become your first-class citizens. And sometimes even you have to change, even if you have to change your priorities and build something specifically for them, sometimes it's okay to take that hit because you're trying to get that customer onboarded. You end up treating these teams as your customers, and even
Correct.
though you don't want to do everything for that customer because you still want to build something generic and universal, but you still prioritize the customer's needs over everyone else's, because adoption is something that's going to measure the success of your design system in the end.
And I think just to add to that, basically we again go with the kind of an advocates in each view, basically who helps us get the results. Because as a only team, you can't basically go to each designer or developer and then tell them about things. So rather just pick people from each view, and then they can basically serve as a POC for you, so that you can drive that adoption throughout.
Yeah, I think the point that you mentioned that our entry point is designers. I think that's very interesting because I feel a lot of people usually face problems here where they build the design system and then the devs start just npm installing and importing these components. But since the design is a different design, which is not built for design system, it can end up creating issues where you're just building something in design system which is not really built on design system from design. So yeah, I think that's a great point. Um, then I think one more question that I have was, like you mentioned that we have OKRs and just the overall process that we have. How do we scope our building phase, and how do we make sure that um, we are how do we make sure that we are not uh, giving out something which is maybe not needed or not important, or something that is not really required in the work? Because I know that like if I'm building a component, I'll just go and build like a super nice component with all the props that it can provide, with like all the style props, etc. So how do we exactly scope that problem?
Yeah, I'll take that up. So the way the model that we have been following at Razorpay is that, like, there are two ways that you could approach this, right? Either you kind of be like a consulting based of a model where different teams would, like, ask for components and you build for them, or you kind of like go a different way where you say, okay, we'll just go ahead and see what are the commonly used components. We'll first build them and then we might go a different route. So at Razorpay, at least for now, we are in a phase where we kind of go around and, like, we have done like the audit of all our products. Based on that, we kind of figured out, okay, what are the components that are used across our products, and then what the number of instances that they are being used. Based on that, we kind of sorted them based on depending on their usage, and or the number of times they have been used in across all the products. That kind of gave us a number that, okay, what is the most used components, and we kind of sorted that list based on the usage, because it's very obvious, right? You want to first ship out the components which is gonna reduce the overhead of migrating to design system slowly. So that's kind of the approach that we have taken, the way we kind of define the boundary. And let's say if there's a team where they kind of say, okay, we need this component, we kind of go ahead and ask them the question, okay, why do you need this component, and is there a need that other teams need it? If not, then we kind of say that, okay, this belongs to your product, and not everything that we build as a component across the products has to be part of design system. So things which are really reusable, they should come under design system, else they can be very much specific to their products. But what we have made sure is that even people who are building the custom components, we kind of have exposed all our principles, basically our tokens. So even if they are building their own custom component for their use case, the design language is still going to be the same because they can use our tokens and build on top of it. So that's kind of the approach that we are following.
Yeah, I think the point that you mentioned about the way we did audits internally and prioritize components, right? I think that's very important because no single company will decide that this is what you need to build. So let's say a new company wants to build a design system. It's not like there's a clear list of components. First, I'll build text, then button, then this, then this. It's going to differ from company to company. What we also did is we went back and audited every single product at Razorpay and understood what are the most used components for us, and that became a priority list. Because if you build components that are most used, they're going to be more likely to get adopted, and that's going to create a higher impact for us. So I think for any design system team that's starting out, prioritizing according to your customers' needs, I think that's very important.
Yeah, Sarah, do you have anything to add to this?
I think they have covered much about it, but yeah, again, just focusing again on the auditing part. Again, that's still a challenging thing. Like, it's not very easy to audit your products, so you have to make sure about like what products you are going into and how you are auditing your products. And because I would say involve more members of your team in that audit, because you might be biased about few things. So that would help because this is something that will that you will be taking decisions upon, right? So that is something I wanted to call out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think involving people, like what Saurabh just mentioned, is a key thing. Like, involving people while you are building the system is the primary requirement, and if you don't do that, it's going to create a lot of friction when you are kind of exposing things to adoption. Like, and it's very obvious, right? Imagine, why would you, like, as a human, you like, none of us actually like that, okay, we are imposed with a bunch of decisions. But let's say if you are being involved, you are also being given the flexibility or eligibility that, okay, because you are like, your consumers are your designers and devs who are working on the product teams. Now, if you take their inputs, they have real use cases from the products that they are building. Now, if we kind of remove that, we might ship things which would solve, let's say, 80% of the use cases, but the 20% is what would refrain them from using your system. So it's always better to involve people while you are building or while in the process, and also keep taking active feedbacks on what you are building. It's basically being more inclusive while you're building the system.
Yeah, awesome. I think we've covered most of the points. We can move to Q&A now. I'll just go to the questions. So we have a lot of questions. The first question is from Prabhu. He is asking, how did you define tone and voice for Razorpay, and how do you communicate the same to the team? I think you can take this up.
Yeah, I'll take this up. So voice and tone. Generally, we have a UX content writing team here at Razorpay, and generally they come up with the guidelines. So in a similar fashion, we are doing several efforts to basically build this inside Figma. So right now, what we are doing is we have guidelines, content guidelines for each and every component, right? For example, let's say if you have to use a button, and just for the case, just for example, let's say it's you are have to put a button which says pay now, right? How should you convey a message to a user? That is something that will come from a content guidelines. Now, how we are targeting from the voice and tones is like we are also offering them the the results, like what can they put in terms of that particular pay now button, because some designer can put pay now, pay this amount, like it can be a different variations, right? So we are also building a system which also drive the content inside of it, although we are facing some challenges in terms of implementing it with inside Figma, but this is how we are doing it right now. So for us, a single source of truth is every component would have a guideline around the content. So basically they have to go through it and they can understand how we speak about it.
Got it. So next question is from Prajwal. They've asked, so there are three questions. I'll go with the first one. How do I go about choosing the right color theme for my project or website? I think you can take this up, sorry.
So sorry, can you come again?
How do I go about choosing the right color theme for my project or website?
Oh, nice. Okay, so we have also like invested a lot of time in choosing a color theme, and I think there is no right answer here to choose a color theme, as to say, because we have tried different things here, and once you go with a particular reason, basically you again go for feedback, and you might see like people are not aligned with what colors you have come up with. So I'll just tell how it worked out for us. So basically, we started with the old palette that we have earlier, and then we try to tweak and try to basically construct a color out of it. Like once we are done with that, we share it with the team, and then we do a kind of an internal exercise where people are trying to put it inside components, or maybe they will try to design things using that particular color palette, and then you will get to know like, okay, how your, let's for example, let's say if you're putting it in a dashboard, they will look, you can see the colors how they are going well, like because just to for an example, let's say if you're putting an alert component inside a layout, how would it look when it merges with the background, right? So that's where the internal exercise helps. But going forward, I think we have invested almost more than 3 months, a quarter only, in choosing our color themes. So we have basically finalized on some ColorX model, and then we have again tweaked it to basically match our own preferences. So there is not right or wrong thing to basically choose a palette, but yeah, you should always have have a global palette at first, so that where you can pick colors from. But yeah, I think this can be a whole point in discussion. Like this can be a whole talk and color discussion. But yeah, this is something which I can give out.
Yeah, I think the second question is, what are some good resources to get started with design system? You can take this up, Kamlesh.
Okay. So I think first start with the problems, and let's say like when you start building, let's say I can just skim through a lot of design system tutorials or a bunch of blog posts, but that doesn't help. The thing is, once you start building, you actually know what problem you want to solve, and then you can start reading upon those things. My one-stop favorite blog post, or not blog post, rather I would say the publication is 8-Shape Tokens by Nathan Curtis. Like you can just go to their Medium publication and you can literally find a lot of specific topics to read about. And then, of course, from super friendly folks, which is being run by Dan Moll. Again, they have a bunch of good articles on their website. So these are like the two things that always comes to top of my head when you talk about resources. So yeah.
I think on top of that, what would really help is if you actually go look at design systems that are built by other companies, right? So you have Pluralsight, you have Atlaskit by Atlassian, you have Primer by GitHub, you have Carbon Design System, Reshaped, you have Material UI. So these, you also have Blade by Razorpay. So these are great entry points on how to go about building your own design system, understanding the different philosophies of what others have done and what makes sense to you and what doesn't make sense to you. At Blade, we also write a bunch of RFCs that on every single decision we take, from naming our tokens to what our motion looks like. We write RFCs for it. So if you want, you can also go through all the RFCs that we've written on Blade.
Yeah, great. So one last question from them is design system always built from scratch, or is it possible to develop a design system on top of a UI library? So I think Kamlesh should talk about it.
Yeah, I didn't clearly understand. Can you just repeat once? Our design system
like,
built from scratch,
Can
or what?
we should it always be built from scratch, or is it fine to build it on top of UI library?
Okay. I mean, the long story short is it depends. So imagine that, let's say you are like, it depends what you are trying to solve for. If you have like a brand identity which matches like a lot of design systems out there, you can just use it and like, tweak it based on some of your needs. But if there are certain things that you're not able to fix, for us, the tipping point was that we wanted to solve for cross-platform, and that's where the idea came in. Second, we had our brand identity, which is kind of like which didn't match with all the design systems out there. So depends from use case to use case, and also the amount of investment that you want to solve, amount of investment you want to make. For example, you can't afford a lot of developers bandwidth, but you still want to have some components in place where, so that you can speed up your dev process. Maybe you can just use bunch of other design system component libraries out there, maybe Chakra, maybe Carbon, maybe Primer, maybe Reshaped, a bunch of other libraries like that. So depends on what you're trying to solve for, and you can basically take that choice based on depending on that.
Yeah. So I think the next question is really interesting. It's by Ajay. They're asking for highly custom layouts, usually needed by marketing teams, which are highly experimental and go through several A/B journeys. How can design system maintainers support such teams without restricting creativity, and also not stretching themselves too thin? How flexible is too flexible? So, yeah, I think you can take this up, Sarah.
Yeah, I think basically in this case, it's not about what basically you're trying to work upon, right? So basically, as from the design system perspective, if I have to talk about, generally when you basically build a component, right, it's not necessarily to be built around the accessibility in mind, right? It can be built in several cases. Like for example, it can be broken into different parts, and then you can consume it in a different manner, right? I think from design side, I can't have a singular answer in this, but yeah, you folks can add to it.
I think at this point of time, it's not about like there's a common thing that pops up in everyone's head that once you have a system that kind of blocks the creativity. That's actually not true, because if you have, let's say, your base things in place, for example, you might say that, okay, you have a button, but maybe the marketing team doesn't want to use that. That's fine. Like you have the principles or your tokens in place, right? For example, you have spacing tokens, you have colors, you have all your accessibility and motion things defined. People can still go ahead and use those as building blocks and build their own custom components, and it shouldn't be a problem. But now when it's come to difference between like whether it should be flexible
or it should be very restrictive. That's again a call that you have to take for your use cases. Like, it's not about blocking the creativity, I would say. It's more about how you want to make your products look similar at different pages. For example, you would not want all your landing pages to look different. Like, they should still be they should still look like they belong to one brand. Now, in order to make them feel belong to one brand, what you need is you need some set of restrictions, right? You can't, for example, we made a conscious decision on Blade that we don't want to expose style and class name props. That did had some backfire on us, but when we kind of explained it to people, everyone is now aligned. So it's like people are kind of very much accustomed to everything being flexible, but when you set some meaningful boundaries, it really doesn't like breaks the creativity. So I think in the end, it depends like what you're actually again uh, designing for. Like, no one just says that, okay, if you have your colors or your brand tokens and everything in place, you would literally block your creativity. You could still be more creative, right? For example, one thing that I keep one thing that I always keep in mind is I'm not really sure about the internals, but when you look at Cred, right, a lot of their things across their pages, they look kind of same and they kind of reiterate a lot. Similarly, Zomato, right? Their brand guidelines, everything is still the same. But if like every 2 or 3 months, like the pace has reduced recently, but last year, I guess every 2 3 months, they were kind of pushing out different layouts. And of course, Zomato has a design system which is named as Sushi. So it didn't kind of gave them a lot of more ways to be more creative, is what I would rather put it.
I would also add to this, like it doesn't block your creativity. I think it's a kind of a myth, because let's say you don't have to use system from start, right? Let's say if you have some new explorations, go wide, go try out different things, right? And once you try different things out, and then you can come back and see the system, like, is it aligning to what your thought process is? And let's say if it's not aligning at certain points, although it would at most of the times, but let's say if it wouldn't, this is the way you will also contribute back to the system, right? You will let us know, okay, this is the use cases that you have. Or maybe it's not always true that 100% of your pages is always design systems. You will see like people are doing different things and they doesn't involve any system in place. So I think in that fashion, if you think in that way, it doesn't basically block your creativity. It's basically empowering you to work on things, right?
Yeah, I think it's just the design system shouldn't reduce your creativity, but it should just create these boundaries for you so that you remain within the scope of your brand identity. It's like every time I go on Gmail and I go on their settings page, I'm so used to Material UI. But the moment I go to the settings page, I ask myself if I'm being fished here, if this is still Gmail or this is something else. So you have to ensure that whatever A/B experiments you do, whatever creativity that you bring into your product, are you staying within the brand identity of your product? And I think that's what design system enables you to do.
Yeah. I do see more questions. I'll take this one. There's a question by Vaishak. They're asking, was there a thought of adopting a component library like MUI or AndDesign on top of which components can be built? So I think it's more related to, more respective to Razorpay or how what we chose for Blade. So did we think about MUI or AndDesign as a base?
Uh, I would just take that up. So not really, because like we just evaluated their design language and we kind of did a POC where if we change the brand colors and everything, will it still fit on? Like, will it still be a representative of our brand? The first thing, the first answer we got was no, because um, it would just mean, let's say, if I take an example of MUI, it would just mean that, okay, it's just Material UI, but with different colors. That is something that we didn't want it. Second, we didn't had a, like, we didn't had a cross platform behavior. Like, we had Material UI and then we had like paper, right? So we had to, like, again, if we go that route, then we have now two bunch of libraries where again the same chaos would happen, that different teams would try to fit in different colors, change different colors, and then on one platform, some things might work, other platform that might be a capability that is still being worked upon. So based on those decisions is what we kind of decided, okay, it doesn't make sense for us to fork or clone any other available design system, and then and rather go ahead and start building our own.
Yeah, just adding to that, but that also doesn't mean that we won't look at other libraries that are existing out there, right? So if you want to build something complex, we will evaluate if it makes sense for us to build it from scratch. For example, if you have to build something like a calendar component, and there are a lot of good solutions out there in the open source community already. If we can do a POC and see if it fits our uh, design system, if it sort of works with Blade as well, then we will very well go ahead and integrate with that library. We don't want to reinvent the wheel again and again for things that are already solved.
Yeah. So have so I think since we're over time, we'll just take one last question. Um, so there's a question around what is the accessibility checklist at Razorpay? I know Kamlesh has answered it in chat, but I think we can just discuss around that part. Like, how do we take care of accessibility in our design system?
Yeah. So just taking a step back, like we directly don't jump to accessibility, but that's kind of like our way of working, or let's say part of our dev workflow. So for us, let's say whenever we want to start working on a particular component, the way everything starts at design. First, it's get implemented by design. Devs are also like the design system devs are involved. We kind of agree upon the APIs. Then, as devs, we kind of write an API decision doc, and that doc basically talks about everything and anything about with respect to the API of that particular component. It talks about animation, it talks about accessibility as well. So accessibility is a section that we have kind of added to our API decision template. Okay, whenever you are building a component, you are kind of forced to think about accessibility guidelines of how you want to address that. And for us, it's more crucial because we are building for web as well as for React Native, and both of them, even though they have a like bunch of similar accessibility things, but still a lot of things are like fragmented. So if you kind of are thinking that how do we bake in accessibility, it's part of our dev workflow, right? Starting from while we're creating the APIs till we implement it. For checklist, I have kind of shared a link which details about the checklist or the step of items that we kind of enforce the developers to follow while they are thinking or considering accessibility.
Also, from the design side, we are taking care of accessibility inside Figma only. So basically, all the components will go through a test. For example, let's say contrast ratios and things like that. And generally, we have a few UX patterns set on how the flow should be defined. So basically, we use our guidelines to drive that accessibility kind of things. Yeah, just adding to that, what Kamlesh said.
Yeah, great. I think we
I'll
covered
just
most
show.
questions.
Yeah, I'll just show our code and Figma, and how like when we just spoke about how we keep things same across Figma and code. I'll just show a sneak peek about it. Just a second.
Yeah, sure. That'll be interesting.
So yeah, I hope you are able to see Figma. So
Yeah.
I've just
Yeah, we can.
like, this is basically a Figma file. Don't focus on anything else, just focus on the screen. This is basically a button component. And if you see, this is literally a props table, like what we talk in technical terms, right? So it has state, variant, size, screen size, icon position, is disabled, is full width, right? Now, how does it actually work in action? So here's a button component that I took. Just can you see at this right pane, the right section, right side, you have a bunch of properties, and these are the properties that we actually implement in code. Now, the way it works is, let me show you next one. It's a primary button. I want the variant to be secondary, or I want to be a tertiary button, right? And then I would say, okay, I'll need a medium size button, or let's say I want a small size button. So this is literally how you build components when you are actually implementing them, right? So this is how we have implemented in Figma. Now let me show how this button is implemented even on code. This is a storybook. This is our storybook, which is again publicly hosted. Now it has the same properties. You could see variant has primary, secondary, tertiary, right? Similarly, is it disabled? Yes. And similarly, we had like the way we saw size, we have the same properties over here. So this is basically how our code and design, everything is in sync, and we kind of speak the same language. So at any point of time, what you see in design is actually what you get in code.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think the Figma looks so much like Storybook. It's great.
Yeah, I think a lot of
Uh,
times I rather not use Storybook as documentation, but I prefer to use Figma as our documentation.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that brings us to the end of the discussion. I think we had a really good chat. I learned a lot, and I hope that everyone has learned a lot as well. We didn't take some questions, but if you have like more questions, you can always reach out to any of the folks here through their Twitter, or you can also tweet out your questions to Razorpay Engineering channel, and we'll try to get them answered. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Kamlesh, Saurabh, Chaitanya, for amazing discussion. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for being a nice
Thanks.
host. Thanks, folks,
Yeah,
Yeah,
for joining.
thanks. Thanks a lot.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
folks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. And yeah, y'all can stay tuned for our next engineering meetup announcement. We'll be hosting this meetups often, so just follow on Twitter, and you can so that you get notified every time we host a new meetup. Yeah, the questions that were not answered, we'll just answer them from Twitter channel as well. So yeah, you can check out the Twitter channel of Razorpay Engineering. Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming.